The CPI report, Child Protection in Iowa, brought to you by Vocal, Victims of Child Abuse Laws. You can watch our program on Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock and again on Wednesday evening at 9:30, all on cable channel 15. Also, it's aired in Council Bluffs on Cox Channel 23 every other Thursday at 4:30 p.m. You can email us at vocaliowa@mchsi.com. My phone number is 515-276-3956. John's number is 515-282-2672, all in Des Moines here. My name is Don Burgmaier, and with me at the controls is my co-host,
John Harvey, and welcome to the CPI report. CPI stands for Child Protection in Iowa. It stands for a few other things, but that's what we use it for in this program. There are a number of things that we do, but we attempt to look into issues of child protection, try to do the best we can to influence in Iowa issues that have to do with child protection. And we side in with parents for the most part because that is part of God's design is the institution of the family, and much of what we have been seeing in past years is the destruction of the family, tearing apart the family for the purpose, the so-called purpose of protecting the children from their parents. It makes a tremendous industry going. Before we get too far away from that first purpose, then we also talk about a second purpose, and that is our purpose is to assist people who are having difficulties with the Department of Human Services and with the juvenile court situation. It's difficult for us to work in the juvenile court because we're not attorneys, but we can give you some advice as to what to consider as you work with your attorney or as you go in and prepare your own paperwork and plead your case before the court. The juvenile court works differently than the courts that you watch on television because it's all done in secret, and they have a different goal. They set aside the Constitution. They set aside a few other important things. The issues are not publicized. In other words, if a reporter was there, they would kick the reporter out of the courtroom because they want all this stuff done in secret. As long as they can do it in secret, there can be all kinds of problems arising. So basically, we have two missions. One is to influence public policy as it relates to child protection, and also we'll work with people who give us a call wanting assistance with how to handle cases if you're adversely affected by the Department of Human Services. By the way, if you're the kind of family who has been overjoyed with your interaction with the Department of Human Services, we'd like to talk to you too. We haven't found anybody. We've been on the air for about 7 years, and it would be a change of scene if we were able to find somebody who was really happy about their interaction with the department. Turning to a different theme here, different from our introduction anyhow, we have seen some real terrorism going on over the past 25 years that child abuse laws have been in effect. It's been about 3 decades entirely. If we looked back, well, it's in excess of 3 decades because a lot of these laws started penetrating about the early 70s, around 72 to 74. And a lot of the investigations were done with the intelligence level of a second grader. That isn't to demean second graders, but that was about the caliber of protection that we were seeing, or the caliber of investigations that were being seen uh, in those early years. And they haven't improved much since. Anything to get a conviction, anything to get a substantiated report. And now you'll be hearing in the news that child abuse reports in Iowa have risen 55%, those that have been um, founded reports. So this means that the DHS obviously will be wanting more money, more staff. They'll be wanting more influence over families. And I think if we ever had anybody that could look into those reports, into the secret halls of the Department of Human Services, we'd find that many of those confirmed reports are worthless. They are simply an opportunity for people to go in and get the influence and the money that is offered by the state and by the federal governments through all kinds of grants. Well, two of the major stories in daycare centers at the time that a lot of this was getting underway, when moms were leaving the homes and beginning to work out and had to place their children in daycare, certainly there would be some concern that your children would be well protected from any kind of abuse, and that any kind of a hint that abuse was taking place could raise some real difficulties. We had a case like that in Ames, Iowa, where a certain outbreak of false information came that a daycare center there was tolerating child abuse. So the worker decided to call all of the parents, inform all of the parents that that an investigation was underway, and of course it killed the daycare business. So just one silly reporter or one silly social worker can bring down all kinds of terroristic pursuits. And this case, though it cost $16,000 to pursue it, was found to be an improper case. It was a false charge of child abuse. But that didn't keep the business from being torn apart. An early case occurred in Minnesota in which children were said to have been abused. When those children were interviewed as adults, it was found that because they were treated as though they had been abused children, the situation was extremely poor in their assessment as adult individuals. So when you treat a person as though he's been abused, even though he has not, the effects are devastating. They're talking about now the effects of child abuse, child sexual abuse, as being something that is lives for a lifetime. Well, it may, but I think that from the real, if we were to look into these cases, I think we'd find out that people do develop coping skills and are able to overcome some of the problems of youth. And we expect people as adults to overcome anything that was terroristic or frightening to them in their youth. Another case, and of course there's many cases that we can cite with respect to daycare centers. Don't hear this so much anymore because I think we go through waves of problems. But another case was that in Manhattan Beach, California. This case was more familiarly known as the McMartin daycare. case. We're going to ask Don to go through a rather lengthy story. Trust that you'll be patient with us on this lengthy story. This is a man who is 30 years old now, who was asked about his recollections of his stay at the McMartin Daycare Center. Don, what happened in Manhattan, Kansas, with a little boy in daycare in Manhattan, Kansas? And by the way, maybe I should also say, in this case, they tore the daycare apart. In fact, I think they've actually destroyed the property, removed it from the scene, and they jailed the mother and one son. And it took many, many, many years before they were exonerated and released from jail. But let's hear it from a boy who actually went through the terror of the investigation at McMartin. Don?
You said they destroyed the place. I remember that they dug up the playground looking for tunnels underneath the playground.
That was in North Carolina.
Oh, was that another daycare?
Like I say, there have been many
A lot of
many
similarities,
eruptions.
Yes.
In the North Carolina case, the fellow took him on a spaceship.
Mr.
And-
Bob.
Yeah, and he doesn't make any difference how much fantasy the kids weave into the stories, because the life of a child is fantasy. And if they speak in fantasy, that's to be expected. But when the investigators are looking for good, juicy stories to report on, they treat fantasy as if it was alive, and they forget that these children are telling stories that wouldn't make sense in any other context. But if they need it for their little reports, they will write stories. Now to McMartin Daycare Center. Don?
A long-delayed apology from one of the accusers in the notorious McMartin preschool molestation case by Kyle Zerpolo, as told to Debbie Nathan, October 30th, 2005. So this is very new.
It was in the Los Angeles Times, by the way.
My mother divorced my father when I was 2, and she met my stepfather, who was a police officer in Manhattan Beach. They had 5 children after me. In addition, my stepfather has 3 other children in the combined family. I'm the only one of the 9 children he didn't father. I always remember wanting him to love me. I was always trying excessively hard to please him. I would do anything for him. My stepbrothers and stepsisters and a half-brother and half-sister went to McMartin preschool. So did I. I only remember being happy there. I never had any bad feelings about the school. No bad or vibes or anything. Even to this day, talking about it or seeing pictures or artwork that I did at McMartin never bring in any bad feelings. All my memories are positive. The thing I remember about the case was how it took over the whole city and consumed our whole family. My parents would ask questions. Did the teachers ever do things to you? They talked about Ray Bucky, whom I had never met. I don't even have any recollection of him attending the school when I was going there. The first time I went to C2, it's a Children's Institute International, now known as Children's Institute Incorporated, a respected century-old LA County child welfare organization, where approximately 400 former McMartin children were interviewed and given genital exams, and where many were diagnosed as abuse victims. We drove there, our whole family. I remember waiting for hours while my brothers and sisters were being interviewed. I don't remember how many days or if it was just one day, but my memory tells me it was weeks. It seemed so long. It was an ordeal. I remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to get out of here unless I tell them what they want to hear. That's a common statement by children. We were examined by a doctor. I took my clothes off and lay down on the table. They checked my butt, my penis. There was a room with a lot of toys and stuffed animals and dolls. The dolls were pasty white and had hair where the private parts were. They wanted us to take off their clothes. It was just really weird. And DHS does that same thing too with children, with their play dolls they take to the children. I remember them asking extremely uncomfortable questions about whether Ray touched me and about all teachers and what they did, and I remember telling them nothing happened to me. I remember them almost giggling and laughing. Yeah, the adults have a good time and they get paid for all this. Look at the nightmare they put the kids through. I remember them almost giggling and laughing, saying, quote, "Oh, we know these things happen to you. Why don't you just go ahead and tell us? Use those dolls if you're scared." See, the adults go to classes and learn how to talk to the children to finally convince them to say something, so then kids can go home, even though they never was abused. They didn't know the answers to these adult questions. So it goes on. Anytime I would give them an answer that they didn't like, they would ask again and encourage me to give them the answer they were looking for. It was really obvious what they wanted. I know the types of language they used on me. Things like I was smart, or I could help the other kids who were scared. I felt uncomfortable and a little ashamed that I was being dishonest. But at the same time, being the type of person I was, whatever my parents wanted me to do, I would do. And I thought they wanted me to help protect my little brother and sister who went to McMartin. Later, my parents asked if the teachers took pictures and played games with us. Games like Naked Movie Star. I remember my mom asking me. She would ask if they sang the song. I'll stop and interject something there from a few years ago when we were hearing about this. Here, in this case, it's parents were asking the teachers, ask if the teachers took pictures and played games. They were asking their own children this. The reason why the parents asked the children was because the therapists that were involved in the family issue on this situation, they would give, what would it be called? Anyway, they'd ask the parents to go home and with their children ask them certain questions and plant thoughts in their mind. So the adults fell into the trap too. I remember my mom asking me. She would ask if they would sang the song, and I don't know what she was talking about. So she would sing something like, "Who you are, you're a naked movie star." That's again, it reminds me of the psychologist putting these thoughts into the mother's mind to tell their children, so the children would know after the fact. It didn't happen to them until mom and others, the adults, planted these thoughts in these children's minds. I'm pretty sure that the first time I ever heard that from my mom, after she asked me 100 times, I probably said, "Yeah, I did play that game." My parents were very encouraging when I said that things happened. It was almost like saying things happened was going to help get those kids in jail and stop them from what they were trying to do to kids. Also, there were So many kids saying all these things happened that you didn't want to be the one who said nothing did. You wouldn't be believed if you said that. So that really puts a kid in a trap, doesn't it? So he wants to be appreciated and respected at school. I remember feeling like they didn't pick just anybody. They picked me because I had a good memory of what they wanted, and they could rely on me to do a good job. I don't think they thought I was telling the truth, just that I was telling the same stories consistently, doing what needed to be done to get these teachers judged guilty. I felt special, important. It always seemed like I was thinking. I would listen to what my parents would say if they were talking, or to what someone else would say if we were being questioned at the police station or anywhere, and I would repeat things. Or if it wasn't a story I'd heard, I would think of something in my head. I would try to think of the worst thing possible that would be harmful to a child. I remember once I said that if you had a cut, instead of putting a Band-Aid on it, the McMartin teachers would put on dirt, then put the Band-Aid over the dirt. That was just something in my head that was bad. I just thought of it and told the investigators. I think I got the satanic details by picturing our church. We went to American Martyrs, which is a huge Catholic church. Every Sunday we had to go, and Mass would last an hour, hour and a half. None of us wanted to go. It was kicking and screaming all the way there. Sitting, standing, sitting, standing. What I would do was picture the altar, pews and stained glass windows, and if investigators said, describe an altar, I would describe the one in our church. So when he was under questioning, his mind would go back to the Catholic Church, and he would describe what he's seen in the Catholic Church. It wasn't what was happening at the daycare. Or instead of, there was a priest in a green suit, someone who was real, I would say. A man dressed in red as a cult member. From going to church, you know that God is good, and the devil is bad, and his horns, and is about evil, and red, and blood. I'd just throw a twist in there with Satan and devil worshipping. I remember going in our van with all my brothers and sisters, and driving to airports and houses, and being asked if we had been abused in these places. I remember telling people that the McMartin teachers took us to Harry's meat market and describing that I thought the market was like. I had never been in there before, and I was fairly certain I was going to get in trouble for what I was saying, because it probably was not accurate. I imagined someone would say, they don't have that kind of a freezer there. And they did say that. But then someone said, well, they could have changed it. It was like anything and everything I said would be believed. The lawyers had all my stories written down and knew exactly what I had said before. So I knew I'd have to say these exact things again and not have anything be different. Otherwise, they would know I was lying. I put a lot of pressure on myself at night in bed. I would think hard about things I had said in the past and try to repeat only the things I knew I'd said before. I remember describing going to an airport and Ray taking us somewhere on an airplane. Then I realized the parents would have known the kids were gone from school. I felt I'd screwed up and my lie had been caught. I was busted. I was so upset with myself. I remember breaking down and crying. I felt everyone knew I was lying, but my parents said, "You're doing fine. Don't worry." See how parents fall into the trap too? And everyone was saying how proud they were of me not to worry. I'm not saying nothing happened to anyone else at the McMartin preschool. I can't say that. I can only speak for myself. Maybe some things did happen. Maybe some kids made up stories about things that didn't really happen and eventually started believing they were telling the truth. Maybe some got scared that the teachers would get their families because they were lying. But I never forgot I was lying. My stepdad was a police officer who had guns in the house. I remember when all this was coming down. He was put on a leave of absence from work because he was being investigated for supposedly threatening the McMartin family. He was cleared of that accusation. Apparently it wasn't true. But being only 9 years old at the time, I thought my dad was saying he would kill the McMartins. So in my mind, I figured no one from the school was going to dare mess with him because he would have hurt them first. That made me feel secure. It could be a reason I never mixed up reality and fantasy and always knew I was lying.
Don, should we take a break? This is a long story, but it's a very riveting story, and I think it's important that we get the reflections of this 30-year-old man who spent time at the McMartin Daycare Center and show the kinds of things that were portrayed or kinds of tricks that they used on children. Those same tricks are still being used. Anything to get a child to say what the social worker wants them to say is quite all right, so long as it fits their scheme. I think what we'll do now is we'll turn to our courthouse reporter. This is the gentleman who is the judge of the judges, and the reason we know that title is official is because he gave it to himself. We know that if you want something done right, you do it yourself. So he appointed himself as the judge of the judges. That's what we all should be. We all should be standing in judgment of these individuals in the judicial system and judging whether or not those individuals are worthy of our trust, worthy of our praise, worthy of our compliance. Right now, let's listen to Terrance Walker.
Thanks a lot, John and Don, for having me on the show again. I think that's a good point you brought up. We all should appoint ourselves judges of the judges, because I think a lot of times society has us bamboozled, especially when it comes to the media and the establishment, which actually protects a lot of the things that the judges do. And until recently, however, there has been really no scrutiny of judges. And we tend to rely upon the news and these agencies such as the Judicial Qualifications Commissions. We have those in every state, or something similar to that. We also have one that oversees the federal branch, or the federal judges as well. We should be able to look at the record and the judge and judge for ourselves whether the judge is fit or if he's unfit, or she for that matter as well. You don't need a law degree to do that. I don't have a law degree. I bet you I can match wits with most judges, however, on a lot of constitutional issues, and you know, I would challenge them if they want to match wits with me in a public debate on the judiciary. We can have an open forum, and the public can come and see for themselves who's capable of judging the judge. I think that most of the public, including myself, is getting really tired of is the whole nomination of the United States Supreme Court appointee. We've got one lady that went down in flames, Harriet Myers. She was nominated by George W. Bush, our president, about 3.5 weeks ago. That didn't last too long, obviously. There was too much of a controversy as it pertained to her views on things and some of the things that she said. I think that one of the key issues was her lack of judicial experience, and also one of the other things that came to light toward the end of her nomination, or I guess before her nomination hearing, was some statement that she had made about 20-something years ago to the fact that she would support a ban on abortion. To me, I think that the whole role of a judge that's fit for office should not only involve experience, it shouldn't just involve judicial experience, it should involve life experience. And I think when you have a building such as the Supreme Court, which purports to, as the words on the building say, to be a place where it transpires equal justice for all, and you have someone there who neither has experience with all members of or all socioeconomic classes of the society and has never experienced injustice, I think that you're kidding yourself to place such an individual in that court or on that court and to actually implement something entitled equal justice for all. I'm kind of just recently here, yesterday, the first article on law.com talks about the appointment of a Judge Samuel Alito Jr. by George Bush to actually replace Sandra Day O'Connor's slot. And this guy has 15 years of judicial experience. He's a Third Circuit Court of Appeals judge. He's went to Princeton University, and he has been practicing law for some time. He's son of an Italian immigrant family, and a lot of the people reportedly in the press call him Sculito because he apparently is not only from the same town as Judge Scalia, who's already on the Supreme Court, but he's also Italian and Catholic. Now, my whole question is this, is how can someone who went to these elite schools and who has no record of fighting for any cause for justice and has never been a victim of injustice, how can they be able to know what is justice and, more importantly, what would be justice for all? And, that's therefore my response to the whole nomination of these apparatchiks, as Bill Moyer adequately called these people that keep getting appointed, is that, they're unfit. And I think that we need to do more to try to get a more rounded set of nominees for these offices, because we tend to get conditioned to believe that someone who's been a judge for years and years and years, or has went to these elite law schools and has practiced law, is somehow able to implement justice for all. And we see the result. If that was the case, and right now we wouldn't have such a major uproar in the press or on this show, or even in the Senate chambers about these judges if they were so fit for office. That's my whole answer to the whole Alito thing. There's a couple other stories that came down I thought was really interesting. And we talk about the Supreme Court and the important role that that court plays. They have a lot of they have the final word to say on a lot of issues, especially constitutional issues or federal issues, wherein there's a conflict of interpretation between various courts. And they tend to, because they end up deciding those conflicts, they tend to have a resounding effect upon policy throughout the nation, because when they interpret something, that then becomes the law. And whether it's in your state or whether it's through the federal Congress, their policy is implemented, and our lives are thereby changed. Now, this was an interesting case which was reported on Bloomberg.com. The United States Supreme Court apparently refuses to give a defendant access to law books. And the story, which was reported on October 31st, states that the Supreme Court ruled that a California inmate convicted of carjacking isn't entitled to a new trial because he was given almost no access to a jail law library while representing himself in court. The justices, in an unsigned opinion, I think that's important for you fellas or you people out there to note, reversed the lower court ruling that granted Joe Garcia Espita a new trial. The justices said that because there is no established right of access to a prison law library for defendants representing themselves, Espita couldn't win reversal of his state court conviction in federal court. Espita, who was in jail while awaiting trial, was given no law library access before his trial began and about 4 hours of access just before closing arguments. The San Francisco-based Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals had ruled that he must be given a new trial, saying the lack of a law library access violated his constitutional right to represent himself, as established by the Supreme Court in 1975. The Ninth Circuit ruling conflicted with decisions by 5 other federal courts around the country. At issue is the state's appeal to the High Court. In the state's appeal to the High Court was the legal standard for federal court review of state court convictions. California Attorney General Bill Lockyer said the Ninth Circuit shouldn't have overturned the conviction in the absence of a Supreme Court decision that squarely entitles defendants to library access. In ruling for the state, the Supreme Court said its 1975 decision says nothing about any specific legal aid that the states owe defendants who represent themselves in court. Espita dismissed 2 lawyers in the months leading up to his trial. He requested access to a law library at least 4 times before the trial. He was sentenced to 38 years of life under California's 3 strikes and you're outlaw, which is aimed at repeated offenders, and his lawyer, W.C. Melcher, said in court papers that jail authorities defied repeated orders from the trial judge handling the case to provide law library access. Espita was deprived of any pretrial access to legal research materials and, accordingly, of any opportunity to make a meaningful defense. Now, it seems awful funny to me that when it comes to something that appears to be such a fundamental miscarriage of justice on its face, without reference to any law, that we have the court in an unsigned opinion. Now, they don't even have the guts to pin their name to this opinion, but then also to deny a man on a hair-splitting legality a right to a new trial, stating that, well, it wasn't clearly established that it was a right for a guy to have a law library access. Well, I'm sorry to say, but if a guy is trying to represent himself and can't get law access, then what the heck is the right good for if you can't research anything at all? You might as well say that the right does not exist. If the right is empty, then it's meaningless anyway.
So we have that whole idea of cuff them and stuff them and throw away the key, right?
Exactly, and that goes back to the other point I was making is when you have a bunch of people, elitists, basically, running the courts, very steeped in all these hair-splitting legalities, and they want to be very technical and stuff like that when it comes to things of this nature. Uh, you tend to think that, well, these people cannot really truly understand what an injustice is. So therefore, how can you conversely have a court that is applying or implementing equal justice for all when they don't have no concept of what injustice is?
Right.
Now, another story here, I thought this would be timely since we were going to talk about next week a Judicial Qualifications Commission complaint. Now, here comes a commentary from the Washington Examiner, November 1st of this year, entitled, Judicial Oversight System Needs to be Benched, Harry Jaffrey. Well, last week, Maryland kicked Judge Richard Palumbo off the bench. Finally, albeit temporarily. It's not easy to fire a judge, he states. Palumbo, as you might recall, is the district judge in Prince George's County, now we're talking about Maryland, who infamously belittled a woman who came to him begging for a protective order against her estranged husband in September. Palumbo dismissed the order, though has since denied doing so. A few weeks later, Yvette Cade's husband allegedly doused her with gasoline and set her aflame. She remains in critical condition. What took Maryland's court system so long to discipline Palumbo? Well, the answer is judges are reluctant to discipline other judges. We will see that next week as we talk about our story in dealings with the Judicial Qualifications Commission here in this state of Iowa. Well, this raises another question. Who judges the judges that judge us? Some details, it seems, are secret. Take Palumbo's case. Lawyers who have come before him say he's a good old boy with bad boy tendencies. Palumbo was a state delegate from 1979 until Governor Paris Glendening appointed him to the bench in 2001. He expected him to serve with distinction and honor. Palumbo was served well, one might say above the law, according to reports in the Washington Post. State troopers voided one of his speeding tickets. Last summer, he caused a car wreck, but got no citation. He must be getting the same sort of favors that Terry Branstad's son got. In 2001, he drove a car into the back of another, walked away, and received only a citation. In the district court, which handles small civil and criminal cases without juries, Palumbo was known to play favorites. A local lawyer close to Palumbo might get a better deal for his client. Business as usual? Not in my case, says the lawyer who personally protested one of Palumbo's rulings. It was offensive. Chief Administrative Judge Thurman Rhodes was aware of Palumbo's tactics and had counseled him, according to lawyers. But judges don't like to judge judges. That's why Maryland has a Judicial Disabilities Commission, which can take complaints and start the process of reprimanding or dumping bad judges. Yeah, only when there's a public furor,
Right.
or a group of judges that don't like another judge. That's only when they act. The commission has 11 members, 3 judges, 3 lawyers, and 5 just plain folks. The commission can choose to investigate complaints or not. As I learned when we were listening to some of the hearings on the Prosecuting Attorneys Council and their dealings, the set of rubber stamping procedures that they implemented. It can recommend disciplinary action to the Court of Appeals or not. That court can ignore the recommendation. We rarely hear about the commission. It operates in total secrecy, like Iowa. On the rare occasions when the commission does come public, the judge has to be caught doing something really offensive, like getting serviced by a hooker in his chambers. That's what forced Montgomery County Judge Henry Monahan off the bench a decade ago. It's hard to give a report card on judges, says Stephen Mercer, a defense lawyer in Rockville. But it's even harder when a lousy judge rules that a parent can't see his kids or lifts a protective order that might give a woman some safety. Which brings us to Judge Palumbo. Will the Judicial Disabilities Commission take a look at him? We can't talk about pending cases, an official told me, but we have to live or die by the rulings of judges who might be themselves under
Right.
investigation if we only knew. And that's what I'm going to wrap it up. That was my final story.
Okay.
Thanks for listening.
Okay. Thank you so much, Terrance. We're going to go back to that story, McMartin story. Don has done a good job of bringing us up to speed on some of the investigative techniques. We won't be able to finish the story. This is a 30-year-old man who was 9 years old when he was in the McMartin investigation, and he's apologizing because he lied to investigators. Who do you suppose wanted him to lie? Well, let's listen to the rest of the story. Don?
But the lying really bothered me. One particular night stands out in my mind. I was maybe 10 years old, and I tried to tell my mother that nothing had happened. I laid on the bed crying hysterically. I wanted to get it off my chest, to tell her the truth. My mother kept asking me, please tell her what was the matter. I said she would never believe me. She persisted. I promise I'll believe you. I love you so much. Tell me what's bothering you. This went on for a long time. I told her she wouldn't believe me, and she kept reassuring me she would. I remember finally telling her, nothing happened. Nothing ever happened to me at that school. She didn't believe me. And she said earlier, I promise, I'll believe you. We had a highly dysfunctional family. We argued and fought all the time. My mother has always blamed anything negative on the idea that we went to that preschool and were molested. To this day, she believes these things went on, because if they didn't, how can she explain all the family's problems? To this day, I can't open up with her about my personal problems. She's always asking me why I never do. Probably because he knows she'll never believe him. That one night skewed our relationship. Once the case was over, it was just over in the past. The defendants were set free, and that was it. The kids' parents never asked, why were they innocent? Why were they unable to find evidence to convict those people? My family has not seen the movies or read the books questioning the prosecution. It's like skeletons in a closet that you just don't want to take back out. I'm the only one who ever brings the topic up and who admits nothing ever happened to me. I've said I lied about everything, but I've never gotten a real response from my mother and stepfather. It seems really strange seeing their reactions to the fact that nothing happened to me. If I had gone my whole life thinking my child was molested, I would be elated to find out that he or she wasn't. I'd like to think learning that your child was not molested would supersede anything. After all you have is your next day. It would be a shame to live the rest of your life thinking molestation had happened when you could think it didn't. McMartin is something negative in my life, and I'm trying to make it a positive. I got 2 little kids I love dearly. They've changed the priorities in my life. My goal is to raise them as best as I can and try to lead an example. I want to be totally honest with them, to say, quote, this is something that happened to me. I did something dishonest. Then at some point I was able to be honest about it. unquote. I want my children to be able to come to me like I wish I could have with my parents. I'm a supermarket manager, and the thing I like best about my job is the interactions I get to have with customers' kids. I love talking and listening to them. I have been told I would be perfect for opening a children's daycare. That's very ironic. I would love to look at the defendants from the McMartin preschool and tell them, I'm sorry. For some reason,
That's all right. That's it. Yeah.
oh, okay.
That's proper.
The article changes here is what threw me off here. This is entitled, How and Why Kyle Came Forward. I first heard from Kyle via email early this summer. He contacted me because I appear in the documentary film Capturing the Friedmans, which he had just seen. Members of the Friedman family were accused of mass child molestation in Long Island, New York in the 1980s. Research I did years ago suggested that many or all of the allegations were false. And in the film, I talk about this. I also discussed the McMartin case. I looked into it while co-authoring Satan's Silence, a book about the national panic over sex abuse in daycare centers and schools in the 1980s. Zerpolo found my website and wrote that he was chilled by the film's depiction of the Friedman family being destroyed by children's false accusations. It was basically the same as the McMartins. I did that. I feel very ashamed, unquote. Nothing he told police and prosecutors about being abused was true. He added, he had regretted it for years. Now he wanted to apologize to the defendants in person. I told Zerpolo I wanted to hear his story. I also offered to put him in touch with the McMartin defendants. Some are dead, including Virginia McMartin and her daughter Peggy McMartin Bucky, Ray Bucky and his sister Peggy Ann, as well as a former McMartin teacher, Babette Spittler, declined to meet with Zerpolo. They always staunchly proclaimed their innocence and said they don't need apologies from former students who were children and couldn't help themselves. So those people, adults that were accused, they could understand why children were pressed into lying. He goes on, or the reporter goes on here. Peggy Ann has said that they would rather hear from the police, social workers, therapists, prosecutors, doctors, and parents who fueled the case. You know what fueled means? Feeding the fire, keeping it ablaze, keeping the cord active. Zerpolo says his mother and stepfather divorced years ago. I couldn't reach his stepfather, and when I contacted his mother for comment, she declined. Zerpolo says she doesn't agree with his decision to tell his story. As for his stepfather, all Zerpolo will say is that he's very ill. This is how Kyle's story snowballed. James M. Wood, a research psychologist at the University of Texas at El Paso, has studied the McMartin interview done by Children's Institute International, giving children dolls and puppets during a forensic interview encourages them to pretend and fantasize instead of sticking to the facts. Wood says, when an interviewer refuses to take no for an answer, this implies that another response is required, even if it's not true. Saying that a defendant, such as Ray Bucky, is being followed by undercover police implies that the accused is dangerous, and that the children should help him should help lock him up. And says Wood, telling children that everyone's talking about the crime creates conformity pressures that are highly improbable. A few years ago, Wood did an experiment in which children were questioned using McMartin interviewing techniques. After 2 or 3 minutes, most of the kids started to make up bizarre stories. According to Maggie Brutt, a psychiatry professor at Johns Hopkins University and a researcher of children's memory and suggestibility, Wood's experiment and others have led to consensus among psychologists. They agree now that C2's method in the McMartin case were inappropriate. C2 Senior Vice President Ambrose says his organization is not in the business of promoting false allegations and never has been. McMartin was the first case of its type. Experts have learned a great amount since then about how to interview children about sexual abuse in ways that meet the needs of the criminal justice system. This remains very difficult, but we're more sensitive now about making sure that the way we interview kids will stand up in court and that what we say will not be taken out of context. Okay, I just want to make a comment, John, and maybe we just will change steps here. What I was reading here, what this adult that was a child in the daycare system, what he was describing reminded me of what we hear from a lot of parents and children about being falsely accused. There's a lot of that going on. And the adults take control, the courts, the attorneys, social workers take control, and nobody wants to stop it. And the person that's involved in it, the parents, the child that's involved, the first time around especially, has no idea what is causing all this. What is the background for the social worker being so motivated to write up abuse reports that are not even true? John, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, it's kind of exciting, I think, to dig up information from children, and I think we have seen that investigators are not the kind of people that should even be talking to children. Some of these people have no way of knowing or how to get in touch with children, so they use fantasy. Well, children are going to respond in fantasy. If you present them fantasy, they're going to respond. And if you act like you can't accept their answer, they'll be willing to change their answer so they please the adult. And then children are also told to obey, to be courteous to others too. So we have a few problems here. Here are telephone numbers that you can contact if you'd like assistance. We'll see you next week.